We are live. Awesome, awesome. Thank you so much to those of you who are joining us here live, or if you're watching the recording, super appreciate it. I am here with the lovely Linda Carlisle. I am so excited to be having this conversation with Linda. We were at a networking event recently, and she started talking about internal comms, and I was like, "Well, I do marketing, which is basically external communications." So we started talking about that intersection. And she was like, "Yeah, they're like yin and yang, and the line between them is the customer experience." And I was like, "Oh my God, we have to talk about this somewhere where everyone can hear the conversation and benefit from it, not just the two of us, sitting at a table or in a private Zoom room." So here we are talking about it. So I am your host. Hopefully you know me. I am Allison Verhalen. I am the owner of AV Writing Services. I am a content marketer, SEO strategist, brand strategist. I like to say I write the words that go onto your website to tell everyone who you are, what you do, and why we should all care. And Linda, tell the good people a little bit about yourself.
Absolutely. So my name is Linda Carlisle, and my business is ComEXT. So I really think of myself as being at the intersection of change management, internal communications, and culture building. So I help companies, if you think about it, change is scary, nobody likes it. I help companies help their teams navigate change while still building trust instead of tearing it down, and building high performance cultures. That's really what I focus on.
Love that. And I love that you used a key word there, trust, which is something I also use a lot in marketing, because that's what marketing is all about, building
Yes.
trust with your audience. So I would like you to talk a little bit about trust and care as the foundation of a high performance culture.
Absolutely. So if you think about the cultures that, or like high performance, what you think of when you think of high performance, one team in particular that comes to mind for me whenever I think about high performance, or even like, well, it's the Navy SEALs or it's the Blue Angels. And these are folks that put their lives out there on the line with each other as a team. The Blue Angels are flying an inch and a half apart for cry. And so, you look at it, they have to trust each other and they have to care about each other in order to do the work that they do in and out every day. And if they don't have that trust and that care for each other, there's no way they're going to put their lives on the line thinking this guy's going to have my back, and they're not going to have the other guy's back either. So whatever it is that you want your culture to be, if you want it to be innovative, there are certain things that you need to do. If you want it to be if you want it to be very customer first, customer centric, there are things you should do. If you want to hold on to your employees forever, there are things you can do. But whatever the other elements you want to build into your culture, if you don't have a foundation of trust and care, you are never going to be a high performance team. So
Yeah, I
that,
love that. I always think in terms of movies because I watch too much television, but we've all seen those movies where you're supposed to be working together as a team and someone breaks that trust. And that is the villain that everyone hates. And it's like, as soon as they break that trust, the audience is supposed to want that person to die. And
yeah,
sometimes they do die, depending on the
yeah,
movie. But that trust is so critical. And yeah, I mean, we talk about in marketing, I certainly in networking, like I said, Linda and I met through networking, and
yeah.
it's all about know, like, and trust, because the idea is people work with the people they know, like, and trust. And the same is true of the brands that we buy from. We want to know, like, and trust the companies that we're buying from. And speaking of breaking trust, an example that I always come back to because it's such a good example is Target last year canceling their DEI program.
Yeah.
And that people were so pissed because they felt like Target made a promise to them that this is what we care about. And it turns out, oh no, we actually don't care. So that we felt lied to.
Yeah.
And that trust is just gone, and Target is still literally paying the price
Yeah.
for breaking that trust. So
And they
yeah.
harmed not only their external brand because it was so public, but they harmed their internal brand. So we talk about the company brand or the product brand, and then you have a thing called the employment brand. What makes people come and
Yes.
what makes them stay, right?
Yes.
And so when you have a certain value proposition that you offer employees, and it includes that we care about having you bringing your full self to work, and that you'll be included, and you'll receive equitable pay and equitable treatment, and then you just go, well, we decided we're not doing that anymore,
Yeah,
right?
never mind.
That belies that trust, right? So
Mhm.
now the whole employment contract, if you will, the agreement, because we don't have contracts anymore, so it's a sort of verbal agreement. You're offering me, this is what drew me here, and then you took this away, so now I'm questioning whether I want to still be there. And I'm going to say one more thing about Target is that their employees represent, and this is an important thing, right? Like when you think about the diversity of your employees, you want to try and have a employee base that matches your customer base. So you don't want to be like, oh, we're all this or we're all that, but our customers are this diverse pool. So Target has a very diverse customer base that they're targeting. And
Yes.
when they do something that signals we don't care about DEI, they're not only impacting the feelings of the diverse employees that they have, but they're also sending a signal to that diverse customer base that we don't care about these topics either. So anyways, Target's
Absolutely.
a really rich case study. So
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? We're still talking
Mhm.
about it how many months later?
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about, because you mentioned this earlier as far as designing culture, like you can design it this way or you can design it that way, or it can be
Yeah.
whatever you want to be, but trust has to create that foundation. So
Yeah.
talk a little bit about how people can go about designing a culture
Sure.
deliberately. We
Yeah.
always talk about like branding by default.
Yes.
culture,
So
culture by
everybody
default
has a
is the same thing.
personality, but it may not be a good personality. It's just like that, right? Unless you're working at, like, the unexamined life is not worth living. You have to examine it. You have to, like, intentionally. If anybody knows, put in the chat who said that, because like that's been niggling at my mind this week. So the unexamined life is not worth living. Anyhow, when I think about the employment brand, when I think about the culture of the company, what you're really looking at is you have your mission. Yes, that's the long-term hill we're going to take. This is our vision. This is who we're going to be or who we want to be. Values. This is what we believe in. This is sort of our moral code. And I like to add in purpose, which is like, if you can do something that's inspiring to people, that's awesome. Those are sort of like structural pieces that fit into the culture. But when it comes down to it and what people experience when you think about culture, you're really talking about behaviors. What behaviors do we want to reward, build into the culture? How you treat each other is what the culture is. So you can have all these fancy words on the wall that you want, but how we treat each other is what the essence of the culture is. And you can build that very intentionally by, first of all, deciding what you have by default that maybe you want to get rid of, and what pieces that you have that you really want to build. And if there are things that you want to build in, like customer experience, right? If you want to put the customer first, maybe you need to put empowering your frontline workers as part of empowerment, so that when that frontline employee hears something from the customer, their initial reaction is, I'm going to help you, I'm going to do what I have to, I'm going to do what I can, and I'm empowered to do that, instead of like, well, I have to go check with my supervisor, I'll get back to you in 8 weeks, right? So you want to build those behaviors into the culture. And then what you do is you work with leaders to say, what are the behaviors we want going forward? But you also want to listen to your people to see, are they going to buy into that? Is it credible? Does it belie something they already know about the culture that wasn't mentioned when the leaders were talking, right? So you want to have that two-way dialogue. And oh, by the way, we know that people adopt things that they feel like they had a say in building. So if you do a little bit of listening as you build your culture, you end up with a much more people are into it, and they're gonna buy in. And then it's about HR building reward systems that help make sure that culture is rewarded, and we're We're putting it into our review systems. We're building it into our 360-degree reviews for leaders. So we're checking to see how are we doing, and HR is building a structure to make sure that happens. And then comms is out there building a campaign that's a long-term campaign that is weaving that message around what those culture behaviors are through all kinds of communication. It could be strategy communication, and you're weaving those messages through. And then, making it fun and engaging, right? So it's just like marketing. You're marketing that culture to your people. And then, it's how that culture evolves that results in what is the customer's experience, right? If you don't build safety into your culture for your employees, then they're not going to feel safe experimenting. If they don't feel safe experimenting, then they're not going to innovate. And so then the customer experience is not one of innovation. So anyways, I very deliberately deciding what's in and what's out, and then making a long-term campaign out of that. And that's what comms does. That's what the internal comms function does, is really, when it's done right, it's done intentionally in a long-term way. And I'm going to say one more thing, right?
Go for it.
You can tear down a very deliberately built culture in seconds by doing something like what Target did, right?
Yeah.
Or I have this story about this guy who called his employees dumb dolphins who couldn't outswim sharks because they didn't deliver a particular bit of code on time, right? So what do you think that did to the culture and the psychological safety within that organization, right? So don't let the stress of the moment, let something fly out of your mouth that is not in line with trust and care and whatever else you built into your culture. So, all right, let's stop talking now.
Yeah, no, that's great. According to Google, the unexamined life is not worth living is a quote from Socrates.
Woo!
So there
I
you
sound
go.
very erudite now.
Yes, your Greek philosophy quotes. Love it. Yeah, and I mean everything that you said about like building that intentionally also goes along with branding and your messaging. We were talking before we went live about how I did a video a few months ago about how my business is struggling. And one of the things that I was looking at is like, well, what's going on here? As I looked at my own messaging and was like, oh, yeah, that's a problem. Because I had not been doing it deliberately and intentionally, it was kind of all over the place. And so I can absolutely see how some people following me would be like, wait, is Allison doing this or is she doing that? Or where is she going? What is happening here? So I had to be more deliberate. I had to sit down and be like, all right, what is the brand that I want? And how am I going to communicate that consistently? Because consistency is the name of the game in marketing. I cannot say that. It's ironic that I have to say consistent over and over. I have to consistently say consistent. And I'm sure it's the true with culture. It has to be consistent because like you said, you can tear it down in seconds. And the same thing with a brand. You can spend your whole life building a brand and you go off and do one weird thing and people are like, wait, what? Again, with the Target example, you go off and you cancel your DEI program and all of a sudden that trust that you have spent so much time building with your audience is just gone,
internally and externally. I like to think of communications and how I approach communications is, take the time to be planful about it. As you said, who do I want to be? What do I want to present to the world? And that's internally and externally. What do I want this culture to be? Who do I want this brand to be externally? Who do I want this brand to be internally? Why do I want to attract people and why will they stay? And then with that in mind, your communications is never one and done, right? So first of all, we're so barraged with messaging. You know this as a branding person, right? What is it now? 16 times you have to hear a message before? It used to be 4, right?
I know. They keep adding to it.
Yeah, because we're barraged with things. So for something has to break through in order to get into your consciousness, but just because it got in, it's going to flit across, we're in the attention economy. And so everyone's vying for our attention. So you have to say things over and over again in different ways. People learn in different ways. So when I talk about rolling out a brand campaign, I like to say, like, let's gamify it. Let's do some video. Let's write it. Let's, all the things, because people learn in different ways, but also these are all ways that people receive these messages. And you're doing it for the long run. So it's like an onion, and it's like a layer of messaging is laid down every day, right? It's how I'm greeted when I bump into the president of the company outside the bathrooms, right? It's how I'm treated, or how I know my peers were treated when we had to do a layoff, right? All the things can sort of come together, and you do have that moment of cognitive dissonance that happens if something happens that is not in line with who we're saying we are, right? And it takes a long time to rebuild from that. It's like an onion, or maybe it's more like a pearl, right? But it's coming on as layer. Like, we'll go with the pearl thing, but it comes on layers and layers and layers. And I'll use this, like, if another piece of sand gets in that pearl, right? Now you've got a lumpy looking, it's no longer a perfect pearl. So, anyways, metaphors, love them.
Talk about that some more, about the alignment imperative, about how you have to, the role of internal communications in alignment. For example, helping employees understand, how do the outputs of your role ultimately impact the customer, regardless of where you sit within the company. And you touched on that a little bit, but if you could dive a little bit deeper, I'd love that.
Yeah, I think that, as part of that notion that we all contribute to the customer experience, and the internal culture drives the internal experience or external experience, I feel like the better each person in the organization understands, how does the company's strategy apply to my role? How does the company's strategy apply to my function? How does my function help fulfill that strategy? And how does my function ultimately impact customers? And when I like to say customers separate from stakeholders, because we have internal customers as well, but I prefer to call them stakeholders, so we have clarity about what is a customer. But you may, perhaps your role only influences stakeholders, but those stakeholders are imperative to the customer experience. So even fulfilling on those internal obligations and strategic roles are important to delivering to the end customer. So it's very important for people to understand that, and then understand how what they do might impact something. Like, you might have salespeople who are out there promising something, right? And they're promising something, and operations can no way, no how ever create the thing that is being out there promised. So you are always going to have, the brand is a promise, right? I made this promise. The brand is this promise. And if operations cannot fulfill on that promise, then you are breaking that promise. You are breaking the brand promise. And so it's really imperative for sales to understand ops and understand what they can and can't, and have that dialogue about what they can and can't fulfill on. And for ops to understand the customer, and to have some dialogues where they understand how the customer thinks and what the customer needs, so that when they hear something from sales, it's not just, right? Like, oh, sales guys. It's more like, oh, that's what the customers are asking for. How can we get there? And problem solving together, making sure there's a royal we there, right? And so it is important to the brand, but also to who we are as an organization. So therefore, to our internal brand, to have those dialogues and understand how our role connects to that customer. Otherwise, you're not in business, right? This is
exactly.
Yeah.
Your customers are the ones keeping you in business. So if you're not serving them.
Yeah. There's also a pride element, right? Like, your job can't be very fulfilling if you don't understand how your job impacts the ultimate customer, right? And when you do, you're going to do your job that much better, and you're going to take pride when the business grows, because you were part of that. So, yeah.
Wow. Awesome. And I love that you talked about the cross-functional learning, sales and operations. I would say that exactly the same thing with marketing and operations. Marketing needs to know what ops is doing, but they also need to translate what ops is doing for the wider world. Someone told me this really funny story about this marketer visiting a brewery, and they talk about something being like and now I can't remember what the term was. It was something to do with not fire roasted, but something like that. And the marketing person was like, oh, we're using that. And the person was like, every brewery does this. And it's like, doesn't matter. We're going to be the only one saying it.
Yeah, I think this maybe came from the show Mad Men, but I think it actually existed in the marketplace first. But like, there was this "It's Toasted" as part of one of the cigarette brands. Like they were like, "It's toasted," but like all tobacco is toasted. But they're the ones out there saying it.
Yep, exactly. I might not have watched that far into that show, but
I am a big binge watcher. When I hook into a show, and as a marketer, hey, that show is classic.
That's true. I was not yet in marketing when I watched that show, so I should probably go back and rewatch it.
Yeah. I mean, my goodness, you get to see tobacco, you get to see it goes all the way through the 60s, and then you ultimately see like the very dawning age of Aquarius, right, where they do that Pepsi commercial.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, it's I think it's a great show for marketers.
It is. Yeah, I should go back and rewatch it. So I do want to talk more about this cross-functional learning, just because my focus lately has been on the cross communication between sales and marketing, because we do usually have operations hopefully talking to both, but they're never talking to each other, and they are both making promises, right? Marketing is out there saying, you know, on the website, on social media, wherever they're marketing, advertising, they're making promises to their customers, and then the salespeople are making promises. Are they aligned? I sure hope so, but if they're not talking to each other, how can you make sure that they're not aligned? And like you said, sales talking to ops, if sales keeps hearing these complaints from customers, or questions or objections, maybe you need to go back to ops to communicate that. We don't have this. Why don't we have this? Can we have this? Customers keep asking for this. Same thing with sales and marketing. It's like, well, you know, people have this question over and over again. Can we have a piece of content that addresses that? Or people keep having this objection. Can we have a piece of content that addresses that, or several pieces of content, or a whole campaign? That way, when you do get people in the door, they're not going to have those complaints because they've already absorbed all of that from marketing. And if that has bypassed them, then the salesperson can say, you know what, we hear that all the time, and we do actually have a piece addressing that. Let me send you the link to that article or that video or whatever the piece is. And now you look like a thought leader, right? First of all, now you're not spending all that time saying the same thing you've said over and over and over again. And it's adding value now. And again, you don't have to repeat yourself because it's all there in the article. They can just go back and reread it or rewatch the video or whatever. So it adds value to the conversation and positions you as a thought leader. But you only have that if sales knows what marketing is doing, and marketing can only create that content if they know that sales keeps getting those questions and those complaints.
Yeah, vice versa. And you know, the other thing is that if you think about it, the sales pipeline comes off the end of the marketing funnel, right? So if you're doing the right things and you've had the right dialogues, if marketing really truly understands the customer, which really means getting intimate with your salespeople, maybe like doing some ride-alongs or whatever, like and it could be research as well, but it's like really getting to understand that customer so that the marketing pipeline, like I'm pretty good at the marketing pipeline, and where I'm really working on my muscles this year is like that sales funnel. But like it does extend off the marketing pipeline. So you could conceivably be helping to pre-qualify through your messaging so that you're making the salesperson's life easier because you're delivering to them sort of these pre-qualified people that have been hooked in by what you're saying because you're saying the right things. But you don't get to that unless you have partnered with the salespeople in order to have that, you know, symbiotic understanding, and vice versa, right? Like it should not be that your understanding as a marketer should be as good as it can be about that customer, so that salesperson isn't coming back and saying, yeah, I need you to say XYZ, right? And then the other piece of it is that I think sometimes in some sales organizations, there's this tendency to overpromise anything, and marketing kind of has to be the gatekeeper and say, no, we cannot make pink dressers with purple polka dots, right? It's just not, that would be too one-off. We can't afford to make, that would be the $2,000 dresser because right, we'd have to do everything special. So putting that guardrail on, you know, what is and what isn't feasible, and that gets back to the understanding operations as well, right? So
Mhm.
there really is I'll tell this story really quickly. I once worked with a company that had developed a product really well received conceptually in the marketplace. Salespeople were really excited about it, started going to market, couldn't build it to save our lives, right? And it was because the folks who were developing the product had not spent enough time in the factory to understand what was feasible from a build out standpoint. So just how it just underscores how important. I mean, people lost their jobs. That plant went through many reorgs and rebuilds and what have you, and it finally came out that it was a design problem, right? Not a manufacturing problem. So really important to have those really rich dialogues. And
yeah, and I know you wanted to tell the story quickly, but when we talked about this previously, we got to talking again, bring it back full circle to trust. How much trust have you broken now with your team, your employees, and with your customers? Because your customers keep expecting they're going to get this thing, and they haven't gotten this thing. And how many? You can only go through so many iterations before the customer goes, you know what, never mind, I'm gonna
exactly. Exactly. And the morale at that plant after being hammered and hammered and hammered and hammered and hammered. And by the way, the leader, who was the original leader, was no longer there, but they loved him. And so there was a certain amount of like defensiveness and loss for that change as well. So yeah, it's just, you're right. It is a really perfect full circle example.
Awesome. And on that note, we are going to let you go. Tell the good people, if they want to continue this conversation, where they can find you.
Okay, you can find me here on LinkedIn, Linda Carlisle. I have a MSIMC and a CCMP on my name. When you look up Linda Carlisle, I'm that Linda Carlisle on LinkedIn, or you can find me on com-ext.com. So
awesome. And I am Allison Verhalen. You can find me also here on LinkedIn, also on YouTube as Allison Verhalen Content Marketer. And my website is AV, as in my initials, Allison Verhalen. That is avwritingservices.com. Linda, thank you so much for doing this. This was so much fun.
This was fun. Thank you. Have a great day, guys.